LaMelo Ball shows up on a Zach Lowe 10 Things article. He discusses his defense, and so will we. Plus, we'll make some second-half predictions today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast. That includes YouTube. If you check us out on YouTube, you can see me, Walker Mail, on WFNZ from 12 to 3 p.m. and 92.7 FM. And then you can check out Doug and his work on his Substack, Every Hornets Boxscore, at everyhornetsboxscore.com. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Second half of the season is underway. We are right smack dab at the midpoint. 41 games have passed. We have 41 games to go. And we'll give some second half predictions in just a moment, a couple of segments from now. But we don't even have a 41 game slate to judge LaMelo Ball because of all of the injuries. But LaMelo Ball has been judged by one Zach Lowe on
won't stop
ESPN.
Zach Lowe, and it won't stop us.
No, it won't. It will not do that whatsoever. We have daily content to fill, and so we're going to the Zach Lowe well. And he discussed LaMelo's defense here. And it was number 5 on the Zach Lowe 10 Things I Like and I Dislike article. Usually when the Hornets show up there, it's usually something Zach Lowe dislikes. That's just how it's been throughout this entire the entire existence of this. And so this is how he prefaces it, by the way, which I think is very nuanced, very, it's a good thing to put at the top just so we don't get crazy. He says LaMelo is 21, ankle injuries compounded by a quote, curb your enthusiasm plot line come to life have derailed LaMelo's season. The Hornets are tanking by accident. I wouldn't read much into worrisome signs. So I do like that he puts that qualifier at the beginning. But then he talks about the actual
hold on. Who is Larry David in this curb your enthusiasm? Who is the sort of who would the camera zoom in on the Hornets season and the music start playing?
Well, I mean, Steve Clifford is the first that comes to mind, right? I mean, this is who are you going with?
No, because I don't know if you're familiar with Curb. I haven't watched all of it.
Not very. I'm not a Curb like super fan. I just know enough about the plot line where I can talk about it maybe a little bit surface level.
Well, so I think one of the fundamental threads of that show is that Larry brings a lot of this on himself. And so when we zoom into Larry uncomfortable, then that's why it's funny, is because like he can't help himself and he brings all of this misery on himself. So I think the leaders in the clubhouse to be Larry David at this point of the Hornets sort of universe is Mitch Kupchak. I think that would feel right. But also the Hornets fan base in general. You just pick a random fan in the Spectrum Center and zoom in and play the music.
Are you saying it's Sombrero Man, our beloved Sombrero Man?
I think he is. Yeah, I think he is probably the most notable fan, at least in Charlotte, outside of Purple Shirt Guy. I think that's the person people most associate, but he doesn't even go to the games anymore.
Yeah, the most beloved fan. It's not Purple Shirt Guy. Wait. I think that is actually the spectrum we need to invent. We need to get to the actual defensive conversation here, but we need to invent the, how much is this person beloved on a scale of Purple Shirt Guy to Sombrero Man? How much are you loved? That's the scale we need to base our love for any.
Listen,
Hornets
if you hate Sombrero Man, then I don't know. I feel bad for you because he's the perfect kind of super fan that doesn't sort of insert himself into the narrative constantly, like the fireman guy for the Jets or Clipper Darrell, or these like folks that like get too big of a like sense of their place within the Hornets universe. Like I love Sombrero Man. Shout out.
Oh yeah, I mean, right behind the goal, just always has the cutout and is always cheering the team on. You gotta love Sombrero Man. Get out of here if you don't. Let's go back to LaMelo's defense. Okay. This is what Zach Lowe has to write. Okay, he says this. That's the first segment. We let off with Sombrero Man. Of course we did. Charlotte has allowed 113 points per 100 possessions when Ball rests, and a grotesque 119 when he plays. That would rank last among teams, and it's not entirely coincidence. So just to make this a little bit simpler, LaMelo, when he plays, their defensive allowed points per 100 possession is the worst in the league. On offense, Ball is one of only 2 players attempting at least 20 shots per 36 minutes and fewer than 3.5 free throws per Basketball Reference. Klay Thompson is the only other guy in that same category alongside LaMelo. And it goes to show that he is taking as many shots as what you would consider the MVP candidates, the best players in the league. And that's something we actually talked about yesterday. This is what Zach Lowe finishes up with. Ball will be fine. He's young. He's big for his position. With vision you can't teach, he's a good shooter. His game is just out of balance right now. I think we were maybe not comforted, but we certainly agree with that last sentence there from Zach. Before we dive into a little bit more of the numbers here, Doug, what did you make of the write-up that Zach had on ESPN?
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits the eye test. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of guards be able to easily get by LaMelo Ball this season, and we've seen teams actively attack LaMelo Ball for 2 reasons. One, because they think that, you know, they can get better guards switched on to him because it's clear that Clifford is trying his best to hide LaMelo Ball on defense. He doesn't put LaMelo Ball against the usage, you know, kind of tier 1 type players that are always going to have the ball in their hands and attack. He's trying to hide them, but they go to the switch pretty aggressively to get better players on ball to attack there. The team's been in rotation a lot. It's not been just Ball. Like, I mean, it's why I've been arguing, you know, against a Ball Rozier backcourt for a long time. It has less to do with the effectiveness of either of those players in a vacuum and more to do with the fact that you are going to struggle to play defense when both of your guards struggle to keep guys in front. So it's been difficult, but yeah, I mean, the numbers absolutely back this up. I just pulled up Cleaning the Glass to see what the on-off numbers had to say for them, and versus last season where he was a negative 0.2 points per possession on defense. They were actually slightly better on defense when he was on the floor last season. That was above average for his position. But this season, they are 6 points per possession worse on defense. That ranks in the 10th percentile. So the on-off numbers, sometimes they lie, but I don't think they lie in this case because I think the eye test is pretty clear.
Well, and again, you're talking about, I think we have 15, 16 games played, maybe 17, something around there, from LaMelo. So it's not like you have a whole half of the season to go off of with some of these other players, even though that's kind of slim pickings when you're talking about the injury-riddled Charlotte Hornets. But it's still is something where you can go out and point plays and look at the film.
Yeah.
And LaMelo is doing the LaMelo thing where he just kind of runs all over the place. And sometimes he has fantastic anticipation and he gets a steal. And that's something Steve Clifford talked about at the beginning of the season. Even with him and this Hornets team, they're not going to be the most disciplined, getting a half court set, not allow you to get by him. And then if you do, we're going to protect at the rim. That's not how that defense operates. If they're successful, then most likely it's LaMelo in one of his rogue defensive possessions actually comes up with the basketball, or it's Robin Lopez at the top of the key not paying attention, and LaMelo goes and pops the basketball out and it turns into transition. That's what happens on successful possessions with LaMelo at the top.
Well, you bring up the steals. You know, his steal percentage is way down. It was 2% last season. That's down to 1.5%, which is below average again for the point guard position. It was well above average his second season, and it was 2.4% his first season. So those chances were paying off, and this season they're paying off less. The foul trouble also hurts, right? We talked about the foul trouble in the last episode. Yeah. If you want to go in depth on that, check that last episode out. But the foul issue hurts as well because we know that when you foul, you send them to the line. Obviously, you tend to send them to the line, and that, or you at least get them closer to the bonus where they're going to be at the line sooner. And those free throws are high points per possession type of plays. You're going to get above 1 point per possession, which is great. So you're giving the other team chance for easy points at the line. So that hurts as well. I think it's been a kind of a multi-tiered problem. It's been blow-bys. It's been, getting back cut, sort of just general awareness. There was a play, I linked this play in my write-up on the Indiana Pacers game on everyhornetsboxscore.com. So if you want to actually look at the play, go check that out. But there was one particular play where he just helps too far on the defensive end, helps off the corner, And against Tyrese Halliburton drives, kicks it sees LaMelo helping too far, and body positioning. He's got his back completely turned from his assignment in the corner. So there's just when Tyrese Halliburton, who is one of the best passers in the league, gets the ball to the corner, there's no way for LaMelo to recover. So a lot of the defensive issues, Walker, are something that we sometimes see on the offensive end that's a problem for LaMelo, which is that he wants to help too much. I mean, a lot of this, I think, and this is part, I think, why you're not super concerned about it, because you're not working from a position of doesn't care enough. You're working from a position of cares too much. And I think ultimately, as he grows older, gets more mature, understands the game, understands not the sort of stuff that he was born with in terms of anticipation and that IQ that we always talk about, but like the stuff, the sort of deeper level stuff about how do I manage a game as the leader of a team. As he learns that, I think it's going to get better.
Well, and you mentioned, the team can't recover. That's exactly what Zach references again. When he fails on a gamble, which happens a lot, then there's no other way for Charlotte to recover and help the helper and all that. And then finally he writes, Ball makes errors you'd expect from young players, though in larger doses, going under screens against top shooters, falling asleep off ball. When an emergency requires on-the-fly rotations, Ball is often the one who snaps the string. Hopefully that improves as LaMelo matures.
I wonder what Steve Clifford thinks about this.
That is interesting. I do too. I think he might have told us a little something about it. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Not only did Zach Lowe have something to say about the defense, so did Steve Clifford, and he said something about the numbers. We're going to myth bust this. Did Steve Clifford actually tell the truth about LaMelo's defense, or was he saying something that is a lie? Was it a myth indeed? We'll get to that in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. How PrizePicks works is that you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And PrizePicks offers projections on any sport you watch. That includes not only the NBA, the NFL, the MLB. It also includes men's and women's college basketball. It includes soccer, the WNBA, NASCAR, tennis, Euro basketball, disc golf, cricket. Yeah, we're getting into a lot of different sports. There's so many more I didn't even mention. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and even Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks gives you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. What did Steve Clifford say about LaMelo's defense? We'll tell you. Coming up next, Locked On Hornets. All right, let's continue the conversation here, Doug, because Steve Clifford also talked about LaMelo on the defensive end of the court. And I know you have the exact quote. The spirit is that the numbers are actually better for LaMelo on defense than they were last year. Can you be the mythbuster and tell us if that's true and tell us what he said exactly?
So this quote is this is from James Plowright's Twitter account at James Plowright. I want to make sure. Yeah, I know at British underscore. Yeah, under British at British_Buzz. Yes.
Yeah, we got to get that right. Shout out to a great Twitter handle. That's one in the Hornets community that basically at the top of the dome. So nice handle.
Apparently I don't.
No, it takes you about 4 tries, but I knew I got the gist of it. We understand that.
The quote from Clifford is, quote, "I think his defense, if you look at the numbers, are much better than they were a year ago," unquote. Walker, do you think do you think Clifford is on point here, or do you think the numbers are not going to tell that story?
So without having gone into more of the numbers than what we just read and kind of looking at surface level stuff again, right? I would have guessed maybe because some of those metrics value steals so much that maybe the numbers would have been misleading to back Steve Clifford up, and it would not have changed my point of view based off what we see when you go to game film. But then we see that his steal percentage is actually down and it's
Right.
below average among guards. And so that takes that out of the equation. So, Doug, I would actually be surprised if Steve Clifford was right in him saying the numbers are better than what last year was.
And look, maybe they have different numbers. Maybe they have like crazy, computer models that would somehow explain what our eyes somehow explain that our eyes aren't seeing things clearly. But the numbers that I'm looking at, which are, you could look at the sort of simple numbers, and people criticize those a lot as not being able to really fully reflect what someone does on defense. We talked about on-off in the first segment.
Well, and nothing does, to be fair, right?
It's difficult. So. It's difficult. It has to be a mix of the eye test and the numbers. But defensive rating is worse. Defensive box plus minus, which again was right around average or above average last season for LaMelo. His defensive box plus minus is underwater at negative 0.9 this season, which is not very good. But if you go to like a site like Basketball Index, which pulls in a lot of synergy data, the story really doesn't get much better. On ball perimeter defense, he was rated C+ at a 56th percentile, slightly above average on ball perimeter defense rating. This season, it's been a D+ in the 36th percentile. He's been a slightly better player on interior defense, but I think, Walker, a lot of that is him recovering from getting blown by and like making a few blocks or a few stops on plays. I don't necessarily think of him as getting many opportunities to deter things at the rim or block things at the rim.
He's not coming from across the paint and helping somebody and then swatting anything or protecting it. I mean, that's not happening.
Right. And as we mentioned, the steal numbers are down. So if you look at passing lane defense, his rating for that in Basketball Index was A- at 87% last season. This season, it's down to 53rd percentile, slightly above average, but not at the level he was last season. That's rated C. The things that he wasn't good at last season, he's still not good at them, and they're slightly worse, like 3-point contests. He gets rated an F in the 13th percentile last season. That dropped to 10th percentile and still an F rating.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the same things. But here's the interesting thing. And I sort of mentioned this in the first segment, that he's being hidden even more than he was last season. Borrego did try to hide him. Like if you look at the usage tiers of the players that he defended, so how often does the player that he defends actually have the ball in their hands and attack with it? You can see that last season, he still wasn't guarding usage tier 1 a lot, but he was guarding usage tier 2 players a lot more than he was this season. And so, he barely guards the usage tier 1 or 2 players at all this season. And it's really usage tier 3 and 4 where Clifford has tried to place him, matchup wise. And so, that tells me, look, hey, Clifford, if the numbers are better, why aren't you playing him why aren't you trying to have him on players that have the ball in their hands a lot? And the answer is because the defense hasn't gotten any better and they can't do that.
Well, because the numbers aren't better. And that's honestly, you're not going to be able to pick from some all NBA level defender with your starting backcourt. Now, Dennis Smith Jr. is clearly the answer on the perimeter if he's out there. Cody Martin is clearly the answer compared to LaMelo if he's on the court in the backcourt as well. But when you're picking with Terry or LaMelo, then it's absolutely pick your poison. And by the way, Terry's guarded some of the better players on the perimeter this year, and we know how that's gone for Terry Rozier, who's also not a great defender anyway. I mean, even if he's not guarding the best opposing perimeter player.
Right. And you get the luxury of doing that, Walker, because he is 6'8". So if there is a small forward, on the smaller end of the small forwards that isn't a high impact offensive player that another team is throwing out there for defense, then you can shift him down even further and allow a Jalen McDaniels or a Gordon Hayward to deal with a better shooting guard or even a better point guard because of his size. You can do that. Well, my question would be, Walker, is you look at this quote. I think his defense, if you look at the numbers, are much better than they were a year ago. Again, unless they have some like crazy number that he can throw out. He didn't throw out any numbers. You notice that. But unless they have some like crazy number that we don't know about, then I think that's false. So the question is that good that Clifford is going out there and defending LaMelo in this instance when everybody, I think most fans, unless you're just totally in the tank for LaMelo, I think most fans can see like pretty clearly that's not true. Is that a good thing that he's going out there and saying that?
I think that I don't know if I'd call it a good or bad thing, and I will absolutely sit the fence, and here's why. Because I'm not so sure LaMelo knows Steve Clifford said that. I mean, does LaMelo know that Steve Clifford, at least to the public, that comment about how the numbers say LaMelo is playing better this year than he was last year? Maybe he does, but I think there are so many different comments that Clifford will have to the public, to whatever media outlet, the entire media, that one kind of gets lost. And if we're talking about the impact that might be had on LaMelo, because ultimately it comes down to, are you making LaMelo angry, and are you making him angry enough to leave? And it doesn't mean that you're coddling him. I just don't know how much impact this has on anything, whether it kind of disrupts the way that the fan base views him. Maybe some staunch LaMelo stans might point to that and say, yeah, see, Steve's right, without having done any of the research behind what Steve says. And so maybe that is the damage it does, but I don't know how much damage it does, in my opinion. Doug, what do you think?
Well, is the question, are you making him angry more important than are you making him better? Right now, so if LaMelo's defense improves in the back half of this season or next season, then I think the right approach. This could be the right approach. In the public, you say nice things, but behind the scenes, you're showing him things and saying, "All right, this is where you need to improve." But I think there is sort of a longer term trust issue with the fan when you're again, the cognitive dissonance when you're going out in public and saying something that is pretty clearly not the case. I think whatever fans are really left that are paying attention are rolling their eyes a little bit and going, does this organization really understand what the fundamental problems are? Like, beyond LaMelo, they keep coming out and telling us that this is a playoff team, and they're not a playoff team. We can all see that. Mitch Kupchak keeps coming out and saying things like, well, we think we have the pieces already. We don't need to go out and go. It's like, why do you keep telling us things that we can clearly see are not true? And I think there is a concern about doing that longer term. In terms of LaMelo, I think if he doesn't show that improvement, then I think there is some real evidence that there has been a little bit of coddling, because but Clifford hasn't been calling out a ton of players in general, and I think you can root that in the injuries. Like, if this were happening, I'll tell you, this would be different, okay? If they were fully healthy all season, LaMelo was continuing to play defense like this, I don't think Steve Clifford would be as guarded when it comes to saying things about all of his players.
You did not mean that, but that is an excellent one if you want to take credit. that is fantastic
deserves
out of you. It does. Yeah, get swiggy with it on that one, baby. That was excellent stuff. And the last couple things too, can you imagine if the record was different? What if they were actually playing for something? Then the intensity, the intensity, what am I talking about? The intensity, it goes way up. And then Steve Clifford is actually calling guys out to make them better because they're fighting for something, and they're not fighting for anything right now.
It's true.
They're not.
He's been so resigned. He's been like, it's not just this quote, but like, he's been so resigned from the injuries, like, hey, we're trying to get better. Really. It's all about getting better. Yeah. It's not about like, getting into playoff shape or anything like that.
Well, and it's all about still believing. I mean, it's the elementary type of stuff. It's what
if you go out there and put them on blast, you just completely sort of eviscerate any hope that these players have of coming together and getting better. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you can make the case on both sides. The injuries, I think, just sit there and really destroy a lot of arguments that you try to make under normal circumstances, how a team, how a coach, how a player should operate.
Well, and again, before we go to break, with LaMelo, the size thing, that's what Zach Lowe mentions. So many people talk about LaMelo's size. He's 6'8". He's in the backcourt, a big guard that's going to help, wingspan, yada, yada. Man, but if that's not coming to fruition for him, then the size doesn't matter right now. It really doesn't. I mean, all of the things that the size should help you with, defensively and offensively, by the way. I mean, if you're talking about LaMelo attacking and using that height to try to get to the free throw line, finish at the rim, defensively, make sure that he can use his length to keep guys in front of him. And when he gets to the rim, not fouling when he gets blown by. I mean, Doug, I don't know what the height is helping him with. LaMelo, to me, if you don't change the athleticism, you could bring him down to 6'4", 6'3", and maybe besides seeing over the top of the defense, which matters, that matters. Other than that, I don't know how different of a player he would be. And size can make players a lot different. So it's not helping you finishing at the rim. It's not helping you defensively. It's not helping you get to the free throw line. What's the size helping you with right now? And that's kind of frustrating when you're talking about that being such a strength at the point guard spot, being 6'7".
Well, and I think so. To Lowe's point, I think it's like the potential is there. So if he were playing like this and he were smaller, then you'd be like, well, this guy's hopeless. He'd be Malik Monk or he'd be James Bouknight. We'd feel the same way. So the fact that he has those tools and he has some like stuff that neither Bouknight or Monk had in terms of just like understanding the game. So yeah, I mean, I'm not like super worried, but I also don't know if this gets fixed in season. I think this has to happen. Not this one. I think it has to happen in the offseason. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. This coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We'll have some second half predictions exactly at the midpoint. 41 games have passed, so we'll get to that in just a moment and tell you that this episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season, which has now officially ended after the championship last night. They have it all covered at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts too, you can even find those on BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting info. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. This episode is also brought to you by TurboTax. TurboTax has experts who can help relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can not do taxes. It's fantastic. With the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish so you can relax. It feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? I know that feeling. It's phenomenal. Come to TurboTax. Don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax. Full service products only.
Do your taxes, but let somebody else do them.
Well, hey, this is what TurboTax is telling you. And honestly, I don't want to do this read. TurboTax is doing it for me, just like they can do your taxes for you. Go to freaking TurboTax, man. Full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at, you guessed it, TurboTax.com/guarantees. Final segment, Locked On Hornets. All right, Doug, second half predictions, midway point, baby.
The
TurboTax read is gonna. Yeah.
Well, just going back to the taxes read, if this will be a good. This whole segment's going to be a good test for who's actually paying attention to the entire show. But on the taxes read, you said don't do your taxes. I just don't want to get sued. I'm protecting you. This is my job, is to protect the radio professional. I just want people to understand: do your taxes, but let TurboTax do them for you.
Do you no, Doug? Stop changing the read. I'm telling the people what is in the print. Come to TurboTax. Don't do your taxes. That's what it's saying. I am not messing this up.
Sued.
I'm telling you.
Somebody's going to be like, look, I defrauded the U.S. government, but Walker Mail on the Locked On Hornets podcast told me to.
I just want to keep the sponsor happy, okay? Maybe I'm a company man. It doesn't seem like you are anymore.
Go to jail. You will go to jail for
those
TurboTax.
I will. I'll tell you right now. Give me money. I'll go to jail for you. As long as they pay for my bond, perfect, baby. That's fine. I appreciate TurboTax and do the message that they tell you to do. Don't do them. All right, let's talk about second half predictions. All right, Doug. Record, are they sellers? Where do you want to start here? Because, it's not been a great season, certainly in the win-loss column. A lot of people have checked out and wanted to go into the Wemby sweepstakes, the whole brick for Vic type thing. So we're actually a month away from the NBA trade deadline. We'll start there. Do you think ultimately in season that Mitch Kupchak will do something he has not done with the Hornets before and make a pretty big in-season trade?
I thought a lot about this because it makes all the sense in the world, right? That the Hornets would be sellers. They've got some players on some extended contracts that haven't performed up to the level that you would have hoped that they would have performed to. So if there's any possibility of ejecting that salary as they look to retool in the future, Even if you didn't want to, break it all down to the studs, like if you wanted to just get rid of one of those players to open up some opportunities for you in the offseason, because they're already going to have a little bit of cap space, but they could, rocket themselves to the top of teams with cap space if they moved, one of Gordon Hayward or Terry Rozier. So the season has been cursed. It doesn't appear like that they're going to really compete for a play-in spot. So it makes all the sense in the world that they would be sellers. But I just can't bring myself to predict that, because two things. We have no evidence that Mitch Kupchak is capable of being a seller at the trade deadline. He just doesn't do this kind of thing. And I don't know whether that's willingness or ability, or inability, I guess would be the better word. And then the second thing is, because those assets that they would try to sell, so many of them have underperformed, I think it would be very difficult for the team to move the player at all, even for pennies on the dollar. Are there assets that are even attractive to teams that are trying to add one or two pieces to make a run at this thing? That's an open question. So I really can't predict confidently that they'll be sellers at the deadline.
So the last couple of years, we've discussed Mitch Kupchak just not making an in-season trade, period. Then he finally did with a Brad Wanamaker / cash considerations trade. That was the one that broke that. Oh. And then we had Montrezl Harrell last season for Vernon Carey. So we took a step up. So maybe if you want to do the whole singular bar thing, we keep going up and then we actually get to something of a larger magnitude here. But the reason being that I don't, part of the reason at least, the last few years, is that the Hornets haven't had anything attractive enough to pull off the big trade. Mm-hmm. The pieces that were of big value, they held valuable themselves and they didn't want to trade, despite maybe our want for them to trade. Terry, they extended, much to my dispute about Terry Rozier's contract. They decided to hand him a big one after the 3-year, $18 million that brought him here in the first place. And they brought Gordon Hayward over on a $30 million contract per year. So they found him valuable. And you didn't trade any of your young guys because Mitch Kupchak, as the famous drop says on Locked On Hornets, we don't have any talent on this team.
Well, so, it's not talent.
We don't have any all-stars on this team.
Get it right.
Right. So you're trying to groom some of those younger players into doing so, and you were still trying to build. Now you're not as much, and you still don't have any valuable pieces except for PJ Washington. That's basically it. So
Mason Plumlee.
And Mason Plumlee maybe. Now that reminds me of a trade, by the way, that was proposed by Bobby Marks.
Okay.
I want to do some kind of deal or no deal.
Sweet baby boy Bobby.
Yeah, we've talked about him a couple times. But he came up with a trade on the Low Post podcast. And I wanted to bring it up. My question is, I guess we should probably save this closer to the trade deadline, right? A deal or no deal segment? Or do we want to do this now?
I don't want to see, everybody calls it deal or no deal. Everybody's like,
don't.
Here we're going to. Well,
this is unique. This is nobody else is doing this.
No, it was a big show, and so people are like, deal or no deal. That makes it. We got to do, if we're going to do it, if we're going to do that on this show, if we're going to take other people's deals and say deal or no deal, if we're going to let everyone else do the work, we should at least be a little bit more creative about the name. And I think I've landed on something.
Oh, okay. All right. You've got something better than deal or no deal. All right, let's hear it. What is it?
Instead of deal or no deal, we do, and this again is going to be a great test for people. Are they listening? If you're still watching, if you're still listening, put this in the YouTube comments. This is going to be, we'll do this all up into the trade deadline. This is going to be, are you ready for this? Are you ready?
Yes.
Stangin' or clangin'?
Clangin'?
Yeah, like clanging off the rim. Come on. Stangin' or clangin'? Is the deal stangin'
or clangin'?
Or is it clangin'?
All right. So if it's stanging, that means that there's a deal, right? And if it's clanging, that means, we're hanging up the phone. We're not doing it.
You got it, buddy. You did it. Yeah, okay. That's it.
I'm smart. I helped. Do we want to do a trade offer now, or do we just want to save this for February 9th, the closer?
No, listen.
You want to
do it?
You want to?
I need it until I can.
Right.
I haven't really. I almost did it last Friday. I almost ran the lottery odds when the Hornets were last place in the NBA. I almost ran the lottery odds on Tankathon, but I'm not quite there yet. That's going to be my obsession here in a few weeks after they continue to lose a few more games and get back into that position. But until then, I need to get my fix. I need some stangin' or clangin'. So hit me with a
stangin' or clangin'.
Clangin' off the rim. That's a thing.
We'll give you the appetizer here, and then we'll do a separate edition of this closer to the deadline. But the one that Bobby Marks posed on Zach Lowe's podcast was Golden State receives PJ Washington and Mason Plumlee, arguably the guys that would retrieve the most value based off what they're worth themselves. So PJ Washington and Mason Plumlee going to Golden State. Go ahead.
Can I pause you? Because I'm just going to try to predict what this is. Okay. So we're talking about PJ, who is, a little bit of a roller coaster season, but, is starting to hit this little push shot. So super effective, getting a little pump fake, get close to the lane. And then
push shot, just so everybody knows. Hard SH on the first syllable there. Push shot. Just want people to know.
Okay. So there's some value there, but Mason Plumlee, that takes it up to a whole nother level, because you're not only getting big Plumlee, you're getting point Plumlee, who giveth and taketh away, but he mostly giveth right now. Double machine. So I'm going to say, adding up those two things, the value coming back, Steph Curry.
Okay.
Steph Curry,
yeah, 100%.
Gotta be Steph, or it's clanging.
Oh, we are. And you left me hanging during stangin' or clanging when you just went on that soliloquy. All right. Golden State receives PJ Washington and Mason Plumlee. Charlotte receives Moses Moody and James Wiseman.
Whoa!
Those would be so the number 2 overall pick would join Charlotte with the number 3 overall pick from the NBA draft a couple of years back, and Moses Moody, who a lot of people liked, and Golden State kind of selected because they wanted him to contribute right away, and ultimately it's been Kuminga more so who was viewed as this project. So what do you think? Are you stangin', or is that a clangin' deal?
I think it's staying, and the reason I think it's staying is because you're getting some young players back, and so a lot of these deals that I think we're going to talk about that I've seen floating around involve second round picks, because you're talking about opportunities again to kind of take pennies on the dollar for some of these players, and it's not going to be first round picks. The draft compensation is going to be second round. And while Mitch Kupchak has shown an ability to get into the second round and make some impact selections, because of the situation around James Bouknight and Kai Jones right now, my leash in terms of this organization in the draft it started to be longer, and now I'm pulling it back because I don't trust them as much with draft capital as I did maybe a few years ago. So I think this is staying, and you get some young players that you can work on developing into the future. I don't know what the contracts are, but I'm sure they're pretty favorable because they haven't
first round. They're all first rounders, right?
Right.
So they're all.
So you haven't gotten into that. That's going to really help your books, I think. Even though you're giving up PJ, who is on an expiring, and Mason's who's on an expiring as well. I think that helps your books long term to have younger players on those type of deals. So, yeah, I think it's staying.
So the question I have though is James Wiseman and Mark Williams effect. Maybe I'm asking the wrong person, and David Walker would be included in this, as we were talking about the draft leading up to it, this past one, where you guys were ready to just at 13 and 15 select Jalen Duren and Mark Williams, go for 2 centers. And so I imagine that still holds true, and you're not necessarily worried about Mark Williams being the young center on this team. You're still taking James Wiseman on and seeing which one pans out of the 2. And if they both do, then maybe you trade one.
Well, no, I mean, you're giving up Mason Plumlee, so now you've got a little bit more room. Possibly it opens up an opportunity to maybe move Nick Richards. I mean, I think he had enough of a showcase early this season that if you did want to move something for like some draft capital, some second round action, then maybe Nick Richards would be an option there. Or you say, hey, we haven't had depth at this position in a while. Yeah, this is not veteran depth by any stretch of the imagination, but we're not looking to be good for the next year or two. So yeah, why not?
All right, last thing, let's end on this. What's the record if they don't sell? Roster stays the same. What's the record second half of the season and overall, which is obviously really important despite the losing, all of the losing, because we know the more losing that comes the Hornets' way, it's the higher the chance of them selecting either Wemby, Scoot, or any of the valuable prospects.
Yeah, this is interesting. So if they don't sell and they get Gordon back and Gordon stays healthy, which is a huge if, they'll get Kelly Oubre back in a month and some change. I think ceiling, because they're starting to play better. We have to recognize that. Even though they lost that close game against Indiana, that was like one of the few times they've blown a third quarter lead. They've been, they just haven't had many third quarter leads, so they haven't had many to blow. But
Yes.
I was giving you a little bit of room there if you wanted to.
No,
anyway,
no, because I'm not a child, Doug. I'm a professional.
Okay, that's fine. So I think all that, I think like ceiling would be 500 basketball. That would be like high ceiling would be 500 basketball, which is not good enough to get you a play-in opportunity at this point, but would be sort of a Panthers level, like, oops, we sort of blew any opportunity we had at the first pick. That would be the nightmare scenario, honestly, if they didn't sell and they played 500 basketball the rest of the way. Yes, your core would be better, I guess, for it, but your long-term prospects take a huge hit. But I think realistically, there are going to be more injuries. This team really can't sustain injuries. They've proven that. They're too far behind the 8 ball at this point. I'm going to say they got 11 wins in the first half. I'm going to go 15 wins in the second half. I don't know what that would put their overall record, 26 and whatever equals 82.
It's a little too much, as weird as that might sound.
You think 15? You think 15 is too many? Well, they got 11 in the first half. I mean, I'm predicting they'll be 4 games better.
I'm not saying that they're not capable of that. I'm saying, especially with where they are now.
Well, the question is if they don't sell. Again, if they do sell, if they tear this thing down, then I mean, I think 10 wins would be, crazy. But yeah. Right.
So Orlando is 15-26 now. That's the kind of record you would expect. And they're third to last in the Eastern Conference, and they're fifth. They have the 5th worst record overall in the NBA. The Spurs are 13-28. The Rockets are now 10-30. So yeah, I mean, that would be as crazy as it is to say, that'd still be a little too much. At the same time, you'd be able to still have a pretty high draft pick there. I agree with you though. Like, I think that's absolutely attainable, especially if you're going to be, even with all of the injuries, and you would expect Gordon Hayward to miss more time because that's what he does. We know how much time Kelly Oubre is going to miss. It can't get worse health-wise in the second half, right? I don't think it can. I don't want to knock on wood, but I don't think it could. And so if that's the case, then 15 wins sounds about right. If they
more home games in the back half too. You have to take that into consideration. That the schedule is slightly more favorable in that respect later on in the season. So you never know.
All right, that'll do it for Locked On Hornets, a Stangen and Klangen episode. We'll bring it back a little bit closer to the trade deadline. Just a little appetizer, just a little Stangen appy for you. Thank you again for joining us, making us your first listen today. Make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, TurboTax tells you to not do your taxes, and I hope you have a great day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.
That is not Doug Branson endorsed.